When we're talking about human trafficking, it's a pretty broad definition. It doesn't have anything to do with moving people across borders or state lines. So that's sort of big myth about trafficking. I think largely is related to the association with drug trafficking, which is when you're moving drugs from place to place. But the movement of people, especially based on the US definition of human trafficking, has absolutely nothing to do with movement. That is a separate designation. This is specific to the exploitation practices and kind of how people are controlled and so forth. So trafficking is the forcing of human beings to engage in an activity. So this could be work or commercial sex work using force, fraud, or coercive control. In terms of sex trafficking, if somebody's under the age of 18, there is no such thing as consensual sex work. So that is always trafficking, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Labor trafficking, typically you'll see this in terms of wage theft, folks who are they're either forced to work. Very often there is an intersection with immigration here where, somebody will be promised a job from another country and then come and find, oh, actually I'm being forced to work, or I'm being forced to work longer hours than I was told, being given little or no wages, indentured servitude, right? Where you have they call it debt bondage. Where I can't leave because I owed you all this money for bringing me here and I can never actually pay that down. So that there's when you see folks that are in agricultural spaces, this is really common. I know it made the news pretty recently when there were some kids in the meat packing industry, because agriculture has all kinds of loopholes about child ages and participating in work. So labor trafficking and sex trafficking are the two most common that we see here in the States. Sex trafficking is specifically commercial sex work, but that can include online, sexual content, what we call child sexual abuse material, CSAM. That can include strip clubs, brothels, right? So anything that falls under commercial sex work, if a person is being forced, defrauded, or coerced into engaging in that, or if they're under the age of 18. And then some other things that we see less here in the States are organ trafficking and human smuggling. So this is where the organ trafficking is what it sounds like: organ harvesting, sale, and transplantation, and the victims are forced, frauded, or coerced. Human smuggling, again, is the movement piece, which is a separate crime. And then forced criminal activity, we actually see this a fair amount in the United States, related to if somebody's being exploited, right? Why wouldn't they also be forced to engage in other criminal enterprises? So if there's gang control trafficking or things like that, you'll see youth that are used to run drugs or steal cars or other things like that. So there's definitely an overlap with labor and sex trafficking with forced criminality. So the three things that I will say are what you're looking for to meet the criteria for the federal definition is force, fraud, or coercion. So force is really anything related to physical violence, confinement, physical, right? Like stalking, being physically present. Fraud, we're saying, oh, you're going to come and be a nanny at this job, or, oh, you're going to work in this strip club environment. There's no sex work involved, but then it's required that you engage in sex work, right? That kind of thing. So false employment offers, and then also withholding money. So saying you'll be paid, but then actually you're not able to keep that money. And then coercion This one's tricky to identify. It is probably the most similar to what we see with domestic violence. So there's, threats and psychological manipulation. I may withhold your identifying documents. I may, if there's sextortion that's taken place, can threaten to share your pictures. If there's a vulnerability within, like, say the survivor has a substance abuse issue, right? That's an easy way to control somebody. So coercion is trickier, but it's definitely something to look out for when we're talking about trafficking. So we'll talk more about identification and so forth. But the legal definition was defined in the year 2000, so not that long ago. 24 years ago, I guess. But this established human trafficking in the States as a federal crime. And there's also immigration relief in the form of T visas and restitution for victims. They've also got the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons that puts out the annual TIP report. So if you want stats on what's going on right now, there's the TIP report that came out the end of last year. So, they generate a TIP report on sort of what's being done in each state. And then there's task forces all over the country that are meant to monitor what's happening in those states. Very good to get involved with them if you do mental health, if you're doing work with schools, because this, can give you more information about things that are happening in your jurisdiction. So CSEC, you'll hear this term from time to time when we're talking about trafficking. This is still sex trafficking, right? But it's a designation for somebody under the age of 18. The reason that we use a different term some of the time is because there's no requirement that there be a pimp or a trafficker for somebody who's under the age of 18. So commercial sexual exploitation of children is any sexual act by a child, so under the age of 18, in exchange for money, drugs, food, shelter, basic needs, anything of value. So, for example, this is a common thing that we see with LGBT kids that are, kicked out of their homes, or kids that are runaways, right? We'll have a 15, 16-year-old who's on the street. Some adult says, "Oh, you can come and stay with me. I'll feed you. I'll buy clothes, whatever." But then there's an expectation that sex is going to be exchanged, or sexual acts are going to be exchanged, or sexual pictures or content is going to be created for that adult. In that case, there isn't a middleman, which is where we see pimps and traffickers. In this case, we're talking specifically about the adult who's purchasing the sexual act or exchanging the sexual act from the child. That is the exploiter. Okay. So, just clarifying that you would never say a child is trafficking themselves. In this case, the child is engaging in survival sex and the adult is exploiting that child.